Number 9. Air raid shelter. For years, Edinburgh resident Mia Gray and other tenants in her apartment building dismissed an old cupboard in the basement, filled with old paint cans and garbage, as storage space. Nobody gave it a second thought until a new neighbor, Liz Mowbray, moved in recently and expressed her curiosity. Gray and Mowbray teamed up to clean the space and discovered that it was far larger than anyone had noticed at first glance, and that it was filled with basins, a heater, and rotting wooden bunk beds dating back to the World War II era. The room served as an air raid shelter for the building's residents in the event of an attack before being forgotten about and rediscovered some 75 years later. There's a bench that runs all the way around the walls, no smoking signs, an emergency exit, an old stove, and 2 triple bunks, Gray told Edinburgh Live, adding that she believes there were more bunk beds, but that they were too damaged to identify and that the ceiling is reinforced with metal sheets. Gray believes that a previous tenant used the space for storage after the war and that the amount of junk they left there deterred anyone else from exploring it or repurposing it. Reporting for Edinburgh Live, Cian Traynor wrote that the city was not a major target during World War II, but that it still experienced its fair share of bombings, giving local residents ample reason to prepare for possible attacks. Number 8. Enigma machine. While searching for discarded fishing nets in the Baltic Sea near the Danish border last year, a team of German divers discovered a rare Enigma cipher machine that the Nazi military used during World War II to send and receive secret messages. At first, the divers thought they had found a typewriter, but underwater archaeologist Florian Huber quickly identified it as historically significant. "I've made many exciting and strange discoveries in the past 20 years, Huber told Reuters, but I never dreamt that we would one day find one of the legendary Enigma machines. Crews from 50 submarines or U-boats received an order to scuttle their vessels and destroy encryption devices in Gelting Bay shortly before Germany surrendered in May 1945. Huber's team suspects that the Enigma was one of the devices that went overboard in an effort to avoid having the machines land in Allied hands. Over 200 German submarines were sunk in the North and Baltic Seas at the war's end. Several 100,000 Enigma machines were produced, but only hundreds are known to exist, and they fetch tens of thousands of euros each at auction. The recently discovered device was given to the Archaeology Museum in Schleswig, Germany. During the war, one of the major turning points was when a team of British cryptographers led by Alan Turing cracked the Enigma code, suddenly allowing them to read all the German communication. Number 7. Wrecked submarine. The American Navy submarine USS Grenadier sank in the Straits of Malacca in 1943 when it was attacked by a Japanese aircraft. A torpedo struck as the vessel closed in on 2 Japanese cargo ships between the Malay Peninsula and Sumatra, and after failing to repair the sub, the crew deliberately scuttled it. The Japanese ships took the Grenadier's 76 crew members as prisoners of war, and the sunken submarine's location was subsequently lost. Divers located the wreck last year 280 feet, 85 meters below the water's surface, and subsequently identified it as the Grenadier by cross-referencing military records and diving to the bottom of the ocean. Because of the vessel's depth, the team had to use a special mix of oxygen, nitrogen, and helium to breathe, and they could only stay at the site for a few minutes at a time, according to Live Science. It took 5 dives for the divers to be able to stay with a fair amount of certainty that the submarine matches the measurements and description of the Grenadier. The next step is for the U.S. Navy to officially confirm the find. 4 of the crew members who were taken captive by the Japanese died in enemy custody, but the rest survived in Japanese prison camps until the end of the war. The team that found the Grenadier hopes to continue searching for 2 British World War II submarines that are believed to be in the general area, the HMS Stonehenge and the HMS Porpoise. Number 6. Secret military base. In 1942, the year after Hitler invaded Russia, the Nazis built a top-secret military base high in the Arctic on Alexandra Land, an island located roughly 650 miles north of the Russian coast in the Barents Sea. Dubbed Schatzgraber, or treasure hunter, the base served as one of a network of tactical weather watching stations for the Germans. A team of scientists from the Russian Arctic National Park announced the discovery of the base in 2016. They were the first to thoroughly investigate the site and collected over 600 items for further study, including canisters of food and other supplies that were airdropped from German planes, weapons and ammunition, batteries, emergency flares, and other military equipment that was left behind when the base closed in 1944. The site is in ruins today, but also contains remnants of tents, bunkers, fuel drums, and an airstrip. Although it functioned as a weather base, Schatzgraber was heavily fortified in case of an attack. The base was abandoned when staff members became poisoned from eating contaminated polar bear meat and were evacuated from the site by the German military. Number 5. Murdered Catholic nuns. When the Nazis withdrew from Poland toward the end of World War II in 1944, the Red Army invaded the country and attempted to seize control by looting and destroying churches and subduing militias. Historical records show that the following year, Soviet soldiers murdered even Catholic nuns from the Order of St. Catherine of Alexandria who worked as nurses at a hospital. Archaeologists found and identified the slain nun skeletons in 2020 as part of an ongoing project by Poland's Institute of National Remembrance. They also unearthed crucifixes, rosaries, medallions, and religious clothing around the remains, according to Live Science. To reach the 3 most recently discovered bodies, archaeologists relied on local archival records to locate them within a municipal cemetery and first exhumed newer burials that were on top of them. Records show that one nun, Sister Generosa, was locked in the hospital's attic before her death, while another, Sister Christofora, was stabbed with a bayonet 16 times after a long fight with a Soviet soldier, having her eyes and tongue gouged out in the process. The Red Army reportedly beat patients and attacked nuns who tried to intervene, causing horrific injuries and death. Number 4. The last missing German warship. In April 1940, German forces invaded Norway through the port city of Kristiansand, destroying its maritime defenses in a matter of hours and forcing the country's king and government to flee to Britain. To aid in their conquest, the Nazis used a repurposed ship that was built in the 1920s called the Karlsruhe. Shortly after starting its return voyage, the 571-foot-long, 174-meter swastika-bearing vessel was hit by a British submarine torpedo. Its crew evacuated, and the Germans deliberately sunk the ship 15 miles, 24 kilometers off the Norwegian coast, where it came to rest 1,607 feet, 490 meters below the water's surface. The Karlsruhe is recorded in historical accounts, but for around 80 years, according to Norwegian Maritime Museum archaeologist and researcher Frode Kavola, nobody knew exactly where it went down. That is, until last year, when the Norwegian power grid operator Statnett identified the wreck in images and sonar scans dating back to 2017 with the help of a maritime archaeologist. The sunken vessel sits just 50 feet, 15 meters from a subsea power cable that Statnett has been operating since 1977 and was discovered during a routine inspection. In a detailed report of the discovery, the Indian Express reported that the Karlsruhe was the last missing big German World War II-era ship. It may contain thousands of liters of oil and other materials, which experts reportedly say could lead to an ecological disaster in the event of an attempted salvage. And while records show that most of the Karlsruhe crew were evacuated, it's unknown whether the site will be classified as an underwater war grave. Number 3. The B24 Liberator wreck. On the night of August 17, 1943, a U.S. Air Force B-24 Liberator heavy bomber piloted by First Lieutenant John T. Parran took off from Port Moresby, the capital of Papua New Guinea, on a mission against Wewak, the Japanese-occupied capital of the country's East Sepik province. During the return flight, the plane climbed to an altitude of 14,000 feet to fly over bad weather and traveled southward. After emerging from the clouds, it changed direction several times while the crew attempted to locate Port Moresby. Around 9 in the morning, Parran ordered the crew to drop extra equipment to lighten the aircraft as it ran low on fuel and instructed his 10 fellow airmen, 5 in the nose and 5 in the rear fuselage, to brace for a ditching. The plane skidded into the water of the Torres Straits off Guinea's southern coast near Saibai Island, losing its tail in the process and coming to a halt in the mud. One crewman was expelled from the plane during the emergency landing and 2 others were badly injured. 2 men were killed as a result of failing to jettison 2 50-caliber waist guns, which came loose as the B-24 ditched, and 3 crew members were listed as missing in action and were never found. Everyone else sustained minor injuries and paddled ashore using 2 life rafts before being rescued by the U.S. Navy. Parran remained in the military and went on to serve in both the Korean and Vietnam Wars. He retired as a lieutenant colonel and passed away in 2005, according to PacificRex.org. While operating a dredge for the Australian government near Saibai Island in 1990, a worker named Brian Hall visited the site. He contacted American authorities, who confirmed the plane's identity and MIA status, and also got in touch with Parran, whom he mailed the aircraft's left control column to. The following year, Hall recovered a 50-caliber machine gun and propeller blade from the B-24. The wreck is still visible to this day during low tide, sitting in the mud as a sobering reminder of the ultimate price that many soldiers paid during World War II, and that their lives were not always lost in the middle of combat. Have you ever found any World War II memorabilia or treasures, perhaps from a grandfather who served in the military? Tell me about it in the comments section down below. Then remember to subscribe to American Eye if you haven't already for more intense videos just like this one. Number 2. Missing Airmen's Remains. When 23-year-old U.S. Army Air Corps Force pilot Alfred Turgeon's plane was shot down during the Operation Tidal Wave bombing mission of Romania's oil fields and refineries in 1943, only the captain survived. The unidentified remains of the crew and other soldiers lost in the attack were buried as unknown soldiers in a section of the Romanian cemetery dedicated to the fallen military members. Because around 100 soldiers were taken captive during the mission, Turgeon's family held out hope that he was still alive, perhaps as a prisoner of war or suffering from amnesia, according to the man's nephew David Bass, who spoke with Anchorage Daily News. But they never found him. In 2017, the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency, DPAA, set out to identify the remains of soldiers exhumed from the cemetery who were believed to have died in Operation Tidal Wave. Using dental and anthropological analysis and advanced familial DNA testing, scientists identified one of the individuals as Turgeon, who was one of 5 Alaskans whose remains were not recovered after the war. The process of recovering and returning Turgeon's remains gave his descendants an opportunity to learn about the relative they had never met, who died serving their country, and gave his one surviving sister the chance to pay proper respects to the sibling she lost nearly 80 years earlier. Turgeon was buried with full military honors in Washington state, where he was laid to rest next to his older sister. Tens of thousands of U.S. soldiers who went missing during World War II remained unaccounted for after the conflict ended, and to this day the American government remains determined to recover as many of these fallen fighters as possible. The identification of Turgeon's remains is just one example of how advancing technology is finally giving surviving relatives long-sought closure and filling in the gaps in family histories for younger generations. Number 1. Hidden Hatch. A secret room in a building in Kent, England led to uncovering secrets from the past. While it's now part of an independent girls' boarding school called the Benedin School, during World War II, the site served as a military hospital. But it's easy to forget the history of your surroundings until you stumble upon something from a seemingly long-forgotten past. During a study session in their recently remodeled boarding house earlier this month, 4 10th grade students spotted a hidden hatch on the wall, concealed by a wardrobe. The curious pupils moved the wardrobe out of the way and opened the mysterious door, which led to a small section of the building's eaves. They crawled into the space to further explore and found a collection of artifacts dating back to the 1940s, including candy wrappers and letters. In addition, the girls collected a Lux soap packet, a cigarette wrapper, and matches. Fragments of 2 letters discovered in the hatch, which were likely written by staff members stationed at the hospital, are the most telling among the items. One dating back to 1941 was written by a woman named Betty to her sweetheart, Bobby. It includes details on how his family members were doing and updates about her life, including a recent theater visit. Speaking with Kent Online, Haley McNally said, "It's really cool because we're living in the modern day, but you hear stories of what happened in the war, and this really brought it to life." Pretty cool, especially considering not everyone will be lucky enough to stumble upon a hidden time capsule from 80 years ago. Number 10. The Eighth Continent. New maps reveal details about the size and shape of Earth's lost 8th continent, Zealandia, which disappeared under the Pacific Ocean. The last 8th continent is currently sitting about 3,500 feet, 1,067 meters beneath the South Pacific Ocean. Scientists confirmed this for the first time that the submerged landmass is indeed its own continent back in 2017. This place is named Zealandia. It wasn't until just recently that scientists managed to map the 2 million square miles, approximately 5,180,000 square kilometers of Zealandia, which is actually 94% underwater. The mapping process was part of a global initiative to map the entire ocean floor of the planet by 2030. This continent is only about half the size of Australia, making it a bit of a baby. The 6% that sticks out of the water is located south of New Zealand. The name of the continent was only coined in 1995 by Bruce Luyendijk, who was investigating the supercontinent Gondwana, which existed 85 million years ago after Pangaea split into 2 fragments. To imagine just how great of a global transformation that was, Pangaea was the singular continent on the planet. Yet, even though it was so big, it still split in half, creating the 2 supercontinents of Gondwana and Laurasia. Laurasia turned into Europe, Asia, and North America, while Gondwana turned into Africa, Antarctica, South America, and of course, Australia. Zealandia broke off from Gondwana, and yes, all these names sound like they come from Lord of the Rings. Sometime between 30 million and 50 million years after Zealandia became its own continent, geological forces pushed it beneath the waves. Nobody even knew it was there until just recently. If Zealandia were still above ground, it could be an entirely unique continent with its own people, civilizations, and animals, unlike anywhere else on Earth. Number 9. Octopus Brawler. In lighter news, a cephalopod was recently witnessed punching a fish in its head, revealing new ways in which octopuses use their 8 arms. While observing an octopus in its home environment, a research team watched as the animal worked together with a fish to find food. They sometimes do this, hunting together to cover a larger area and to increase their chances of catching prey. But when this big blue octopus became fed up with its hunting partner, it punched the fish right in its head. The attack was so fast that scientists almost missed it. The octopus lashed out with an explosive arm movement, striking the poor fish directly in its noggin. Between 2018 and 2019, researchers diving in Israel and Egypt observed at least 8 similar incidences in which octopi abruptly punched their hunting partners. The lead author of this study, Eduardo Sampaio from the University of Lisbon, said that he laughed out loud and almost choked on his regulator. That's how hilarious these incidents were. This has been the first time that octopuses have been seen punching fish out of what appears to be frustration. Researchers currently believe the octopuses were hitting their fish partners as a way of controlling them and keeping them in line. Scientists also believe that punching the fish will sometimes cost less energy than cooperating in the hunt. Whatever way you look at it, octopuses seem to be pretty mean hunting partners. Number 8. Pirate Legends. 150 years ago, gale force winds likely drove a schooner by the name of Jenny and Annie to its death near Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore. This was back in Michigan in 1872. Now the wreck has washed ashore thanks to some heavy waves. But not the entire wreckage. Only a large piece of the wooden ship was discovered. Kim Kelderhouse, the curator of the Leelanau Historical Society Museum, went down to the beach to investigate. She found a giant chunk from the 137-foot ship and shared photographs online, saying that shipwrecks are a tangible reminder of a not-so-lost history. She also claims that the ship is a reminder of just how tough life was for the people working the Great Lakes in previous eras. The Jenny and Annie had a long history of mishaps. The schooner itself was constructed in 1863 in New York by a man named William Crostwaite, who at one time had been considered one of the best shipbuilders anywhere on the Great Lakes. The ship was named after its owner's sisters and given to John Kelderhouse, a distant relative of Kim's. The ship ran into trouble in 1869 and needed to be rebuilt. Then in 1872, it was broken into pieces and only 3 crew members ever made it to shore. The rest drowned in the cold water, and their bones have probably long since deteriorated at the bottom of the lake. But here's the part about pirates. There's a Great Lakes pirate story that's associated with the Jenny and Annie. The pirate's name was Joe Perry, and he apparently lured vessels to the shore using a light. He would then plunder the ships after the crews abandoned them. Perry, the lake pirate, died in 1887, and some people still blame him for the destruction of the Jenny and Annie. Do you blame Pirate Perry? Let me know in the comments down below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. Number 7. The biggest underwater cave. The largest underwater cave in all of Mexico was discovered just a couple of years ago by underwater archaeologists. Not only is this the biggest cave in Mexico, but researchers are calling it the largest flooded cave system in the entire world. It was found on the Yucatan Peninsula by a team who had been studying the Sac Octun and Dos Ojos caves in Tulum for the past few years. But it was when they discovered that these two caverns actually connected that the label of largest underwater cave became a reality. But it's not all about the underwater cave system. It's also about the ancient Mayan civilization. The underwater labyrinth goes on for at least 216 miles, 348 kilometers. And according to a researcher with the National Institute of Anthropology and History, there are over 100 archaeological contexts to be found and researched inside the caves. Some of these contexts include the first settlers to America, extinct fauna, and ancient evidence of the Mayan culture. The Maya actually used these caves before they flooded to communicate with their ancient gods. Of course, it's a little bit difficult to dig for archaeological treasure underwater, but researchers are convinced that with enough time, they'll unearth a biblical number of treasures and relics. Number 6. Relics of Egypt. One of the most impressive underwater discoveries in the history of mankind is still ongoing off the coast of Egypt. The historical artifacts here were submerged for over 1,000 years. The great cities of Thonis, Heraklion, and Canopus were thriving ports in northern Egypt before both of them were crippled and fell into the sea due to natural disasters that happened in the 8th century AD. These cities only survived in vague historical texts and were not rediscovered until the year 2000, when French archaeologist Frank Gaudiot and his team went diving. This was 8 years after Gaudiot began looking for the lost cities. Gaudiot used clues that he found in ancient texts to locate the sites, but that was only just the beginning. Even though it's been over 20 years since their original discovery, it's been estimated that only around 5% of these ancient buried cities have been properly excavated. Some have compared Thonis Heraklion with Pompeii in Italy, as both archaeological locations have yet to be fully investigated. Some of the most impressive relics uncovered include the Decree of Nectanebo I, which is a huge stone slab written in hieroglyphics, bronze statues, golden treasures, and about 250 other miscellaneous objects, many of which are currently on display in exhibitions around the world. Number 5. Ancient artifacts. Divers in South America discovered an exceptional trove of artifacts from an ancient sacrifice ritual inside Lake Titicaca, which borders Peru and Bolivia. Divers found offerings including gold ornaments and even the leftovers of slaughtered animals. These extraordinary finds date from between the 8th and 10th centuries, when the Tiwanaku people, who came before the Inca, ruled the area around the lake. Before the violent Spanish conquest, the region had a population of around 1 million people. The Tiwanaku used boats to travel out into the lake and perform elaborate religious ceremonies. This was a place of great importance for all those who lived in the region. Researchers began looking for underwater relics after a few amateur divers uncovered a handful of ancient artifacts 16 feet, 4.8 meters beneath the surface, only 6 miles, 9.6 kilometers from the shore. The actual archaeological excavations revealed far more artifacts, and even the leather and gold ornaments that llamas were decorated in before they were sacrificed to the old gods. According to Paul Goldstein from the Department of Anthropology at UC San Diego, the Tiwanaku were the greatest Native American empire that most people have never heard of. Number 4. Prehistoric communities. 2 separate studies have discovered rare evidence of prehistoric communities that once thrived on the seashore. These 2 studies revolved around the Gulf of Mexico and eastern Jutland in Denmark. Researchers have found shell middens, also known as garbage leftover from feasts of seafood, that prove rising seas at the end of the Ice Age forced prehistoric societies living by the sea to move farther inland. These huge piles of used seafood shells are thousands of years old. They were basically big mounds of mollusks, and scientists knew they were left over by ancient humans because they showed evidence of being burnt, meaning they'd been cooked. The reason this is so rare is that scientists almost never find evidence of prehistoric society under the water. And yet the archaeologists working with the University of Georgia studying the Gulf of Mexico and the archaeologist working with the Mosegod Museum in Denmark each found evidence of prehistoric activity. The simple explanation is that societies from around the world lived near the sea, feasting on huge quantities of shellfish, and were forced inland when the sea levels rose. Only they forgot something: their garbage. Number 3. The Kennewick Man. The Kennewick Man has been referred to as the most important human skeleton ever discovered in North America. And yet almost nobody knows who this guy is. His skull was found inside the Columbia River in 1996 by a pair of college students from Kennewick, Washington. The students called the police brought in their coroner, and the coroner brought in a local archaeologist. With the help of the archaeologist, authorities were able to pluck the entire skeleton out of the shallow riverbed. At first, experts believed the skull belonged to an early pioneer. The teeth had no cavities and were worn down to almost the roots, which was common with prehistoric teeth. But there was a spear point found embedded in the hip bone, which tipped the scales in how the skeleton was seen. It soon became clear that this guy was 9,000 years old. To this day, the Kennewick Man is one of the oldest skeletons ever found anywhere in the Americas. It was also one of the most controversial skeletons in history. The issue was that the bones were found on land belonging to the Army Corps of Engineers. When they found out that the bones were ancient, they immediately claimed authority over them and demanded that no more scientific study be done to them. These bones actually ended up being sealed in an evidence locker and ignored for years. Because of this, we don't know as much as we could. These things are still being studied, with legal battles as recent as 2004 against who owns the bones. Number 2. Underwater cannibalism. A shocking case of underwater cannibalism was discovered in early 2021. The cannibals here were baby sea stars. These tiny creatures definitely look innocent and adorable, and kind of like Christmas tree decorations. But a new study has found that they are hungry cannibals that eat their own siblings. These are Forbes sea stars, and 2 researchers discovered the behavior of the babies completely by accident. They'd been experimenting with baby sea stars and crabs in their laboratory. But before these scientists could even introduce the crabs to see how much the sea stars would react, the babies began eating each other. John Allen, an associate professor who led the study, then shifted gears and instead focused on observing the voracious baby sea stars. And as it turns out, they have no shame in being cannibals. Juveniles are tiny. Adults can only reach lengths of somewhere between 5 and 9 inches, 12 to 23 centimeters. These creatures also go through a process known as metamorphosis, just like butterflies do. They transform from their baby forms to adult forms. But in their immature form, they eat each other, or more specifically, the bigger ones eat the slightly smaller ones. They likely do this to gain some kind of survival advantage, though it's not clear what advantage that is just yet. Number 1. The sunken plane. At Morrison's Quarry in Quebec, Canada, there's not only a strange sunken plane sitting precariously on the edge of an underwater cliff, there's also a tugboat sitting on the bottom of the lake. These ancient vehicles were placed here purposely for divers, but they're definitely not to be explored by the faint of heart. Some choose to dive here in the winter to check out the wreckage, which requires nerves of steel. For those less inclined to hold their breath while checking out the spooky plane wreck, the water is so clear that you can sometimes see the destroyed airplane when standing at the edge of the cliff all the way above. The plane itself is sitting 35 feet, 10.6 meters underwater, with the tugboat deeper down at 60 feet, 18 meters. There are also 2 cars in the lake, one of which was driven over the edge on purpose while filming a movie, and the other driven over the edge by a couple of car thieves. Number 10. The Technicolor Lobster. Fisherman Chad Graham, working off the coastal water of Nova Scotia, Canada, reeled in the rarest lobster in the entire world. Graham found a strange Technicolor lobster. According to EarthTouch News, the chances of finding a lobster that looks like this is 1 in 100 million. Apparently, the weird pigmentation of the lobster is an extreme irregularity, and it's known properly as a crystal lobster. Graham told local news that after 7 years as a captain of a boat, he had never seen such a unique and amazing lobster. Most lobsters with a pigment deficiency are completely colorless, but this one had a shiny, multi-hued exoskeleton. Fortunately for the lobster, it was under the legal catch size. This means that the fisherman released the lobster back into the water after snapping a quick photo of it. One of the reasons that the lobster may have looked so strange is that it was feeding on a variety of shrimp and algae that contain the same pigment that makes carrots orange and that makes flamingos pink. Eating this pigment is what turns lobsters red when exposed to heat. But if a lobster doesn't eat enough algae and shrimp, it won't be so colorful, and apparently it can turn into one of these rare crystal lobsters. Number 9. Fish with 2 mouths. Russian fishermen reeled in a horrible monster that appeared to have 2 mouths and an unnaturally hooked tail. The fish was found with a normal mouth on its face and another not-so-normal mouth growing out of the side of its neck. The fishermen had no idea why the fish seemed so mutated, but some have blamed it on the nearby Fukushima power plant as it was caught in the southeast of Russia, close to Japan. And even though the fish didn't display any signs of aggression, it was still pretty scary to look at. Even after posting the video of the bizarre fish online, nobody was able to determine exactly what breed it may have been. And nobody knows if the fish was mutated or if it was just a genetic anomaly. No one knows if it grew its extra mouth because of the radiation leaking out of the broken Japanese power plant, but yeah, it's definitely possible. Number 8. The rare blobfish. The blobfish has been labeled as the ugliest animal in the entire world. Well, a new blobfish has recently been put on display at an aquarium in the Fukushima prefecture of Japan. And this is one of the first blobfish to be captured alive and put into an aquarium. According to Japan Times, it was found in the northern Pacific Ocean off the shores of Hokkaido and had been accidentally trapped inside of a gill net at a depth of roughly 3,000 feet, 915 meters. The fishermen who caught this ugly animal were able to think quickly and save its life, and now it's living merrily inside the aquarium. The only thing is that the blobfish looks a little different now than all the memes you've probably seen it in. The change in pressure definitely took its toll, as its flesh has gotten a little soggy since it was ripped out of the deep ocean. Some might say it's actually not ugly at all, but instead sorta cute, in a weird sea creature kind of way. The blobfish now spends all of its time in the darkest and lowest places of its tank, and nobody knows exactly how long it will live for in captivity. And all we can do is hope that the strange fish lives a long and happy life. What do you think about the blobfish? Is it really the ugliest animal in the world? Let me know in the comments down below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Number 7. Mutant Chernobyl fish. One of the weirdest fish ever captured came out of the water channel leading to the destroyed nuclear facility in Chernobyl. This was thanks to Jeremy Wade from Animal Planet's River Monsters. Jeremy was given special permission inside the radiated exclusion zone to see what he could pull out, and what he found was extraordinary. Jeremy didn't pull out a huge monster mutant. Instead, he reeled in a catfish that was half the size it was supposed to be for its age, making it a stunted mutant. Creatures exposed to radiation don't grow as big as they normally would, and like you might expect, and they usually have deformities, and they don't live as long a lives either. It was also found to contain 16 times the level of radiation that is normal with one of these fish. Of course, Jeremy was smart enough to put the fish back in the water and get out of there before he turned into a mutant. Number 6. Monster sea creature. A terrifying sea creature that looks an awful lot like a human being was recently discovered floating in the water just off the beach in China. Locals had to fish the thing onto the shore to get a better look at it. What they found was a freakish creature shaped like a humanoid with a head and extremely stumpy limbs. When found, the creature appeared to still be alive. A curious man on the beach picked it up and it immediately began writhing in his grip. The entire incident was recorded on video and uploaded to the internet, at which point some people began labeling the monstrous sea creature as a type of mutant starfish. No scientific professionals could give a clear definition of what the monster was. Some said it was a mutated sea sponge, but how exactly any sponge or starfish could morph into the shape of a human is anyone's guess. And I don't know about you, but I wouldn't pick it up and start posing with it for pictures and videos, especially if I didn't know it's been exposed to radiation or if it's possibly poisonous. Number 5. The Horrifying Catfish. Tourists in Colombia managed to catch the ugliest, strangest, and most mutated catfish ever seen. The tourists had been chasing after a legendary giant catfish for 3 days when they accidentally reeled in an altogether different kind of fish that appeared to have come not from the deep ocean, but from deep outer space. The fish was so strange that even the local guides were scratching their heads and couldn't figure out what it was. There were no clues as to the ugly fish's identity until the video of its capture was uploaded online, at which point someone pointed out that the tourists had captured something known as an acanthicus, which is a type of sucker-mouth armored catfish native to both the Amazon basin and the Orinoco basin, both of which are in Colombia. But these guys didn't just catch any ordinary armored catfish, they caught an albino one, which explains why the fish looked more like an alien than something that belongs in a river. It had a bizarre beard on its face, it was covered in potentially poisonous spines, and it was definitely not happy about being caught. Luckily, the fishermen put the albino back in the river and let it swim away. Number 4. Finding Dory. A woman recently caught an extremely strange and vivid blue fish that some people have called the real-life Dory from the Finding Nemo movies. This fish was so incredible and so lucidly blue that people online tried to dismiss it as a fake. But it wasn't. It's absolutely 100% real. It just so happened to be one of the brightest parrotfish ever caught. These types of fish come in all kinds of different colors, and blue is one of the rarest and most alluring. It almost looks like the fish is bursting with electricity, or it was dipped in a bright blue paint can. Parrotfish live in shallow coral reefs, mostly in the Atlantic Ocean and around the Caribbean. And even though they look enormous and otherworldly, they're harmless. These fish primarily eat algae that they scrape off of rocks and other tiny organisms. We don't know exactly what happened to the electric blue parrotfish, if the fisherwoman took it home and ate it or what. Apparently, parrotfish are considered a delicacy and they taste great, though divers frown upon eating them. Hopefully she let the beautiful blue fish go and just appreciated her weird catch. Number 3. The most venomous octopus. A user on TikTok recently made one of the worst decisions of his life. Unbeknownst to this guy, he had captured the most venomous octopus in the entire world while vacationing in Bali. The tourist filmed a blue-ringed octopus crawling across his bare hands. And yes, this is one of the most dangerous animals in the entire world. This guy obviously had no idea that something so small could pack such a big punch. The blue-ringed octopus only grows to be around 5 or 6 inches, 12 to 15 centimeters. It's covered in psychedelic blue rings, and it's honestly pretty adorable to look at. But be careful, because the octopus's 50 to 60 blue rings will begin to flash bright yellow when it gets agitated or stressed. And this is the point you should back off of it, or it will inject you with its incredibly deadly venom. The toxins are so dangerous that one sting from the blue-ringed octopus can kill a person before they ever make it to the hospital. The only good thing is that these deadly cephalopods are not at all aggressive and won't usually attack. That is, unless you take it out of the water and begin playing with it. This uninformed TikTok user walked away extremely lucky after recording himself catching and playing with the octopus. Had the octopus decided to defend itself, what the video would have shown instead was the tourist becoming nauseous, going blind, losing control of his motor skills, then falling into paralysis before his lungs stopped breathing. Luckily, he survived the encounter, put the octopus back, and continued on with his vacation and all his new TikTok followers. Number 2. Giant tiger shark. A giant tiger shark that measured over 18 feet, 5.4 meters long, was just captured off the coast of Australia, and it has been described as a monster. The giant predator was captured by a curious man named Matthew, who refused to give out the rest of his identity because of the controversy that surfaced following the pictures of the tiger shark being uploaded online. Many people were outraged and compared the death of the shark to the killing of Cecil the lion. According to Matthew, he'd been trying to catch a smaller hammerhead shark when the much greater tiger shark appeared out of nowhere and swallowed the hammerhead whole. Matthew had never intended to catch an almost 20-foot, 6-meter tiger shark, but that's just the way things went on that fishing trip. But just wait, even though this tiger shark was 18 feet, 5.4 meters long, local fishermen have called it a baby shark, saying that there are other, far larger and more dangerous tiger sharks swimming through those very waters. Yikes, you probably don't want to swim in that area. Number 1. The stingy fish. While fishing off a Texas pier with her mother in Port Isabel, Alyssa Ramirez reeled in what she at first thought was just a piece of seaweed. But then the seaweed started squirming, and she realized that she had a very strange sea creature flopping around by her feet. She knew immediately that the creature was not any type of fish. It was red, covered in weird spines, and it just generally looked like more of an alien than an actual fish. Luckily, Alyssa and her mother were both smart enough not to touch the sea creature, just in case it was poisonous. They found out later that what they had actually discovered was a bearded fireworm, a terrifying sea monster that's able to inject neurotoxins from its bristles directly into a human body. Had Alyssa touched the fireworm, she would have received a wound so painful that it feels like you've been set on fire. Good call not touching it. According to USA Today, Alyssa helped the distressed fireworm back into the water, but was careful not to make any direct contact with her skin. The reason the fireworm is so red and colorful is to warn predators not to eat it. Otherwise, they'll be in for a nice dose of poison. In this case, the colorful warning system actually worked. Thanks for watching. What did you think of these strange catches? What's the strangest thing you've ever pulled out of the water? Let me know in the comments down below, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for all the latest videos right here on American Eye.